Welcome back to The Initiation, a podcast for those who sense we're living through a planetary turning point. A space to explore the converging crises, emerging breakthroughs, and inner and outer transformations needed to rise to the occasion. In the last episode, we crossed an invisible threshold, from breakdown to breakthrough. We began exploring the imaginal cells of a new world, focusing on foundational technologies like AI, robotics, genetic engineering, and quantum computing. Tools that don't just extend our capabilities, but invite us to entirely new ways of being. Today, we continue the arc by turning from technology to systems. Because while tools shape possibilities, systems shape reality. They determine how we coordinate, exchange, govern, and make decisions as a civilization. And increasingly, our current systems are failing to meet the complexity of this moment. Monetary policy that erodes trust. Governance that lags behind the pace of change. Energy systems that destabilize the planet even as they power our economies. But beneath those failures, something new is taking shape. In this episode, we'll explore the emerging architecture of system reorganization, from Bitcoin as a potential base layer for a new financial order, to breakthroughs in energy that could usher in a post-scarcity world, to governance models that blend blockchain AI and swarm intelligence into a more adaptive, decentralized form of collective coordination. These are not patches on a broken machine. They are blueprints for a different kind of civilization. One that reflects the complexity, interdependence, and intelligence of the time that we're living in. Let's begin with money. Because at its core, money is not just a medium of exchange. It's a mirror of our collective values, assumptions, and priorities. And the cracks in that mirror are becoming impossible to ignore. It's easy to think of money as something neutral, just a tool that we use to trade. But money is far more than that. It shapes how we think about time, trust, value, and responsibility. It influences our choices, our relationships, even our sense of the future. It's the invisible architecture behind markets, governments, and culture. And right now, that architecture is fracturing. Over the past century, we've shifted from sound, commodity-based money, like gold, to entirely government-issued fiat currencies. This shift gave central banks enormous power to manipulate the money supply. And while that's allowed them to respond to crises, it's also come at a deep cost. The erosion of purchasing power, the distortion of markets, and a growing inability to plan for the long term. Now enter Bitcoin. At a first glance, it might seem like a fringe internet currency. Volatile, speculative, even silly. But look deeper and something much more profound comes into focus. Bitcoin didn't just emerge as a payment tool. It emerged as a response to a monetary system that had lost its grounding in reality. A system where money could be created out of thin air, where debt was limitless, and where ordinary people bore the consequences of decisions made behind closed doors. Bitcoin offered something radically different. A form of money that no one can print, no one can inflate, and no one can control. It's built on code, not trust in institutions. Its supply is fixed, only 21 million coins will ever exist. Its issuance is transparent and predictable. Its network is decentralized, maintained by thousands of independent nodes around the world. And its rules are enforced not by governments, but by consensus mechanisms rooted in math and cryptography. In this sense, Bitcoin is a kind of monetary imaginal cell, something that began on the margins, misunderstood and resisted, but potentially carrying within it a blueprint for how human value could be stored and exchanged in a different kind of civilization. In a moment, we'll dive into the deeper implications of what this means, not just for finance, but for inequality, war, and the psychology of time itself. But first, we need to understand how we got here, how money evolved from barter to gold to fiat, and why that evolution is now pointing us towards something entirely new. To understand why Bitcoin matters, we have to zoom out and look at the story of money itself. Long before banks or credit cards, humans traded through barter. I'll give you grain and you give me some fish, for example. But barter only works when both sides want what the other has. at the same time in the right amounts. That's called the coincidence of one's problem. And it's incredibly inefficient as a system. So over time, societies developed commodity money, objects that held value and were widely accepted, like salt, shells, cattle, or beads. Eventually, we landed on metals like silver and gold. You ask why? Well, because they had 5 critical properties. They were durable, divisible, portable, verifiable, and most importantly, scarce. Gold in particular stood out. It was rare, it didn't corrode, and it was hard to fake. Over centuries, without central planning or top-down enforcement, the world slowly converged on gold as its preferred store of value. Not by decree, but by the wisdom of markets. But something shifted in the 20th century. To fund both world wars, governments realized they could expand their financial power by detaching money from gold. They printed more paper currency than they had gold to back it up, creating the illusion of solvency while piling on invisible debt. Then, in 1971, the last link was broken when the US formally ended the dollar's convertibility to gold, severing money from any physical anchor. From that point onwards, we entered an era of pure fiat money, currencies backed by nothing but governmental decree. Since then, central banks have controlled the money supply through interest rates and balance sheet manipulation. And while the system has allowed for short-term flexibility, it's introduced deep structural problems. When money can be created at will, its value becomes unstable. Asset bubbles inflate, inequality widens, and long-term planning becomes harder. Those closest to the money printers, like banks, hedge funds, large corporations, benefit first. Everyone else gets hit later as prices rise and wages lag. That's the world we live in now. A world where money is no longer scarce, no longer neutral, and no longer working for most people. And that's the context in which Bitcoin appeared. Bitcoin was born in 2009, right after the global financial crisis. And its timing was no accident. At a moment when trust in banks, governments, and financial institutions had collapsed, this strange open source software emerged from the shadows of the internet. It wasn't created by a corporation or endorsed by a nation state. It had no CEO, no headquarters, no marketing campaign. What it offered was radical, a form of money that no one could control, inflate, or censor. Bitcoin's core breakthrough is this. It combines cryptography, distributed networks, and economic incentives to create a decentralized monetary system, one where trust is not placed in people or institutions, but in code. And the most important point is that Bitcoin has a hard cap. Only 21 million coins will ever exist. That number is fixed in the protocol. It can't be changed by a central bank or a president or a CEO. Every 10 minutes, new Bitcoins are created through a process called mining. And every 4 years, that issuance gets cut in half, a mechanism known as the halving event. This predictable deflationary model is the opposite of what we see currently with fiat money. Instead of trusting a central authority to manage the money supply, Bitcoin relies on thousands of independent nodes spread across the globe. These nodes maintain a synchronized ledger of all transactions, known as the blockchain, and agree on its state through a mathematical consensus. The result is a network that's resistant to censorship, fraud, and manipulation. No one can create more Bitcoins than the rules allow. No one can reverse your transaction or freeze your account. And no one can debase the value of your savings through inflation. In that sense, Bitcoin isn't just a new kind of money. It's a new kind of trust infrastructure. It reintroduces principles of sound money like scarcity, transparency, and predictability, but in a digital, borderless, and programmable form. It's easy to dismiss this as technical or fringe, but when you look more closely, it becomes clear. Bitcoin is an imaginal cell within the monetary system, born at the edge, misunderstood by the mainstream, and yet carrying with it a radical new blueprint for how we might coordinate value in the decades ahead. It doesn't rely on politicians. It doesn't require permission. And yet, it's quietly growing. Every year, more resilient, more adopted, and more aligned with the needs of a world in transition. To really understand the significance of Bitcoin, we have to zoom out. because it's not just a new form of money. It's a direct response to some of the most damaging dynamics in our current economic system. Let's start with wealth inequality. In today's fiat system, when central banks create new money, it doesn't get distributed equally. It flows first to banks, financial institutions, and large asset holders, the ones closest to the money printer. This is known as the Cantillon effect. The people at the top get access to cheap capital and inflated assets, while everyone else feels the pinch through rising prices and stagnant wages. Bitcoin flips this logic. It has no central issuer, no one gets early access, new coins are distributed through a competitive, transparent process called mining, where anyone can participate. And since the supply is fixed, no one can print more to benefit themselves at the expense of others. And then there's the issue of war. Fiat currencies make it really easy for governments to wage war perpetually without raising taxes or getting broad public support. Why? Well, because they can simply borrow or print the money. Under a Bitcoin standard, war spending would have to be funded transparently through actual taxation. That's a higher bar and a powerful constraint on unnecessary conflict. Next is boom and bust cycles. Central banks try to manage the economy by adjusting interest rates and injecting liquidity. But these interventions often create the very bubbles and crashes they're trying to avoid. Easy money fuels speculation. Then tightening pops the bubble, and the cycle repeats. Bitcoin removes this dynamic. Its issuance is steady and predictable. There's no central authority trying to steer the economy. That forces a different orientation, one based on saving, long-term planning, and organic growth. And finally, inflation and consumerism. In an inflationary system, your money loses value over time. That creates a powerful incentive to spend now rather than save. It drives short-term thinking and hyper-consumption, behaviors that ripple through culture and even our relationship with time. Bitcoin encourages the opposite. Its scarcity promotes patience, planning, stewardship. It rewards those who think generationally, not transactionally. So yes, Bitcoin is a technical innovation, but more deeply, it's a cultural intervention, a redesign of incentive structures that reaches into how we live, how we plan, and how we relate to one another. And as these dynamics play out, we start to see something larger. Bitcoin isn't just an asset. It's a potential foundation for a new civilization. Now, so far, we've looked at Bitcoin's technical and economic implications, but its deeper impact may be cultural or even psychological. Because when you introduce a new kind of money, you're not just changing finance, you're changing how people relate to time, trust, responsibility, and value itself. In a fiat system, we're constantly encouraged to think short-term. Inflation erodes savings. Policies shift overnight. Trust in institutions feels fragile. So we learn to optimize for the now, to extract, to consume, and to hedge. That's not an economic condition, it's a psychological one. It shapes how we show up in the world. Bitcoin offers a different pattern. Its rules are fixed. Its issuance schedule is transparent. No politician or banker can change it on a whim. That creates a sense of predictability, of long-term coherence. And that, in turn, encourages a shift in mindset. It's subtle but profound. People begin to save, to plan, to think generationally. There's a growing subculture of people who have built entire lives, businesses, families, philosophies around this new orientation towards the future. Bitcoin also introduces a new ethic of self-custody. You're not handing your assets over to a bank or a government. You're responsible for your own keys, your own security. That can feel daunting at first, but it cultivates something powerful, sovereignty. And in a time when trust in institutions is crumbling, this kind of distributed trust in math, in code, and in consensus rules, is quietly revolutionary. It replaces hierarchical control with network verification. Instead of trust me, it's verify everything. Over time, this could reshape more than just markets. It could reshape our values. A civilization built on transparent, decentralized, non-inflationary money might prioritize resilience over growth, cooperation over manipulation, and long-term stewardship over short-term gain. Because if our systems are mirrors of our mindsets, Well, then maybe changing the way we organize money is one way we start changing the way we organize meaning. So, where does that all leave us? Well, believe it or not, Bitcoin is still very early. The larger public has not woken up yet to its power and its revolutionary potential. But its core proposition is only growing stronger. A decentralized, incorruptible base layer for financial coordination in a world where trust is breaking down. In moments of systemic unraveling, the most powerful innovations aren't always the loudest. They often emerge quietly at the margins, misunderstood, ridiculed, or ignored. But if you zoom out, you begin to see the bigger picture. Bitcoin isn't just an investment thesis, it's an infrastructure thesis, a potential reset of the economic foundation itself. It asks a radical question. What if money didn't need to be a tool of control, manipulation, or debt? What if it could become a shared protocol for cooperation and truth? Whether or not Bitcoin becomes the dominant global currency is still an open question. But even now, it offers a credible alternative path, a parallel track for those who no longer believe in the promises of the old system. And that's the deeper signal here. When a civilization is in transition, when its stories, structures, and institutions begin to fracture, what matters most is what emerges beneath the surface, the imaginal cells of the next paradigm. Bitcoin is one of those cells. It doesn't just critique the existing system, it embodies a different logic. Scarcity instead of inflation, openness instead of gatekeeping, rules instead of rulers. And that logic may end up playing a central role in whatever comes next. Now, let's turn to the next system change that is on the horizon, a new energy paradigm. If you want to understand how civilizations rise and why they fall, look at their energy systems. From the fire pits of early humans to the coal-driven engines of the industrial age, each leap in energy has reshaped the way we live, govern, and relate to the planet. Today, we are on the cusp of another seismic transformation. The systems that powered the 20th century, centralized, fossil-fueled, and fragile, are reaching their limits. But in their place, something new is emerging. Decentralized, intelligent, and abundant energy architecture that could redefine the very foundations of our society. Energy is the lifeblood of civilization. It powers our homes, fuels our economies, and underpins nearly every aspect of modern life. But the system we rely on to generate and distribute that energy is breaking down. It is centralized, fragile, and overwhelmingly dependent on fossil fuel. And it is rapidly becoming incompatible with both planetary boundaries and geopolitical realities. At the same time, a wave of technological breakthroughs is rewriting the rules of the game. From advanced solar and battery storage to small modular nuclear reactors and next-gen fusion, we're entering a new energy paradigm. One that has the potential not only to decarbonize the global economy, but to fundamentally reorganize the foundations of civilization itself. Let's begin with the basics. Fossil fuel still accounts for over 80% of global energy use. This dependence on coal, oil, and gas drives over 30 billion tons of carbon emissions annually, contributing to extreme weather events, sea level rises, biodiversity loss, and geopolitical instability. Fossil fuel supply chains are also vulnerable to disruptions. Wars, embargoes, and market volatility create spikes in prices and shortages in supply. But despite the persistence of fossil fuels, we're in the midst of a historic shift. Renewable energy is no longer a fringe solution. It is becoming the default. Solar, in particular, has undergone a radical transformation. In just over a decade, the cost of solar electricity has dropped by more than 85%, making it the cheapest source of power in human history. The technology has improved too. Innovations like perovskite solar cells and bifacial panels have pushed conversion efficiencies well above 20%. Countries like India, Chile, and China are deploying solar at staggering scale, not out of idealism, but because it is the economically rational choice. But energy generation is only part of the puzzle. The real challenge has always been intermittency. The sun doesn't always shine, and the wind doesn't always blow. That's where storage comes in. And here too, we're seeing rapid progress. Solid-state batteries, flow batteries, and new thermal storage systems are enabling renewable energy to be stored and delivered reliably around the clock. Companies like Form Energy and Energy Vault are developing systems that can store energy for 100 hours or more, closing the gap between viable generation and constant demand. These breakthroughs are creating the conditions for a fully renewable powered grid, one that is cleaner, cheaper, and more resilient than anything we've seen before. Nuclear energy is also making a comeback through a very different form. Rather than relying on massive centralized plants with high risk and cost, companies are developing small modular reactors, so-called SMRs, compact factory-built units that can be deployed rapidly and safely. With passive safety features and the ability to be scaled incrementally, small modular reactors are poised to provide clean, reliable power for cities, data centers, and industrial applications. Next-gen designs like molten salt and high-temperature gas reactors take things even further, offering greater efficiency, low waste, and even the ability to consume existing nuclear waste as fuel. The potential of these technologies is really immense. A steady, zero-carbon baseload that complements the viability of renewables. And then there's fusion. Long considered the holy grail of clean energy, fusion has always been just out of reach. But that may be changing. Recent breakthroughs in confinement, laser ignition, and magnetic field control have pushed fusion closer to viability than ever before. The US National Ignition Facility achieved energy gain in 2022. Meanwhile, China's Qinghu project is aiming for an operational fusion-fission hybrid reactor by 2030, targeting a so-called Q value above 30, meaning it would produce 30 times more energy than it consumes. For context, the best Q value reached so far was 1.5 in 2022 in the US. If successful, Qinghu could leapfrog global fusion timelines by a decade or more. If successful, fusion will mark a civilizational tipping point. Clean, abundant, and virtually limitless energy would upend everything from economics to geopolitics. It would enable large-scale carbon capture, water desalination, advanced manufacturing, and high-intensity computation. It would decouple energy use from environmental harm. And perhaps most importantly, it would move us beyond the zero-sum logic of scarcity, unlocking the possibility of a post-scarcity civilization where energy is no longer a constraint on human flourishing. But this transformation is not just technological, it's structural. The old energy system is centralized, hierarchical, and brittle. The new one is decentralized, networked, and resilient. Distributed energy systems, rooftop solar, home batteries, microgrids, and peer-to-peer energy trading are putting power literally into the hands of the individuals and communities. In sub-Saharan Africa, solar microgrids are already electrifying off-grid villages. In Europe and North America, smart grids are allowing neighborhoods to become energy self-sufficient and resilient to blackouts. This decentralization shifts not just infrastructure, but agency. It reduces reliance on monopolistic utilities and vulnerable supply chains. It democratizes access to energy, empowering people to generate, store, and sell their own power. It also reshapes geopolitics. Energy has long been a source of conflict and coercion. Countries have gone to war over oil. Economies have been held hostage by pipeline routes and choke points. But in a world of abundant, decentralized energy, those dynamics begin to fade. Energy sovereignty becomes achievable. The leverage of petrostates diminishes, and the map of global influence starts to redraw itself. The economic implications are just as profound. Abundant energy lowers the cost of everything: manufacturing, transport, agriculture, data processing. It enables vertical farming, clean water production, and resilient supply chains. It makes it possible to scale advanced technologies like AI, robotics, and quantum computing without environmental trade-offs. And it creates the conditions for a new kind of economy, one not driven by scarcity and extraction, but by creativity and regeneration. When energy becomes cheap and ubiquitous, it frees up attention and resources for deeper pursuits: education, art, healing, and exploration. But of course, none of this is guaranteed. There are significant risks. technological failures, regulatory capture, unequal access, and the inertia of legacy systems. Transitioning to a new energy paradigm will require political courage, economic retooling, and cultural imagination. But the direction is very clear. The trajectory is exponential, and the possibilities are profound. In the end, energy is not just a technical domain, it's a civilizational substrate. And the shift now underway from centralized fossil fuel systems to decentralized clean abundance is one of the clearest signs that the foundations of the old world are giving way to something new. The new energy paradigm is not just about decarbonizing. It's about decentralizing, democratizing, and ultimately liberating human potential. It is one of the clearest imaginal cells of the next civilization. And like all imaginal cells, its role is not just to replace the old, but to make something previously unimaginable inevitable. Which brings us to the third topic within this category, new governmental structures. Now, as the structures of the old world begin to buckle under mounting complexity, ecological strain, and institutional decay, a new questioner is rising to the surface. How do we govern ourselves in a world that no longer fits the blueprints of the past? Governance, once the domain of parliaments, bureaucracies, and top-down authority, is being reimagined in real time. What's emerging is not just a new political ideology, but a new operating system for human coordination. One that's decentralized, intelligent, adaptive, and capable of responding to planetary scale challenges with speed and nuance. Let's explore the imaginal cells of this governance transformation, from blockchain-based decision-making and predictive AI policy models to swarm intelligence and planetary stewardship networks. Together, they offer a glimpse of how the next civilization might govern not through control, but through coherence. Now, governance is the invisible scaffolding of civilization. It shapes how decisions are made, how power is distributed, and how we coordinate action at every scale, from local communities to global systems. But the governance structures that have carried us through the last 2 centuries are increasingly out of sync with the complexity and speed of the modern world. Top-down bureaucratic institutions struggle to respond to the accelerating crises. Trust in governments and corporations is plummeting. And the systems that once promised stability now deliver gridlock, corruption, and system fragility. We're living through a legitimacy crisis, one where many no longer believe the current systems can deliver a viable future. But as with all major transitions, something new is emerging within the breakdown. New governance models are forming, distributed, transparent, intelligent, and adaptive. They hint at a deeper transformation in how civilization organizes itself. This isn't just about fixing old systems, it's about evolving beyond them. Now let's begin by understanding the core tension. Traditional governments has always been constrained by the limits of trust. To manage large-scale populations, societies have historically relied on centralized institutions, governments, legal systems, regulatory bodies, to create and enforce rules. These structures were necessary in a world where trust was scarce and coordination at scale was difficult. But they came with cost. But they came at a cost. Inefficiency, hierarchy, capture, and inertia. Emerging governance models flip this logic. They don't require trust in institutions. They build to operate without it. Blockchain and smart contracts are the first wave of this shift. Instead of trusting a government or a corporation to mediate a transaction, we can now use cryptographic protocols to enforce agreements automatically. Contracts become code. Rules become transparent. Enforcement becomes incorruptible. Decentralized autonomous organizations, so-called DAOs, are early experiments in this new paradigm. Built on blockchain infrastructure, they enable groups of people to govern resources, make decisions, and execute plans without a central authority. Token holders vote on proposals, budgets, and protocol upgrades. Treasury movements are transparent and automated. While still early in development, DAOs represent a glimpse into how communities might self-govern in the future. And this is just the beginning. Governance is becoming intelligent. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are now being applied to public decision-making. Platforms like Taiwan in Taiwan, platforms like Platforms like vTaiwan use AI to analyze public sentiment and to identify areas of consensus across polarized viewpoints. These insights inform policy recommendations that are more representative, less reactive, and harder to game. In the near future, AI-enhanced governance systems could continuously process vast data sets, economic indicators, climate signals, public feedback, and use predictive modeling to test policy outcomes before they are enacted. This shift from reactive to proactive governance could reduce unintended consequences and enable more nuanced, responsive decision-making. Now add quantum computing to the mix, and the horizon expands even further. Quantum systems could simulate trillions of variables, helping societies navigate the complexity of issues like climate adaptation, economic restructuring, or migration. The roles of governance shifts from command and control to guidance and calibration, less like a machine and more like a nervous system. Beyond AI, we're also seeing the rise of swarm governance, systems that mimic the emergent intelligence of natural networks. Think of ant colonies or mycelial webs. No central planner, yet remarkably coordinated. Similar dynamics are now being engineered into human systems. There's, for instance, the example of swarms of autonomous drones distributing medical supplies across Rwanda to places that are really hard to reach otherwise, or decentralized sensors monitoring air and water quality in real time, or satellite-based AI tracking deforestation and carbon emissions, allowing for decentralized ecological accountability. These systems don't rely on legislation. They respond directly to data. They self-adjust. They enable governance that is continuous, adaptive, and scale-free. The most radical implication is that governance may no longer be something that only humans do. We're entering in an era where intelligence is embedded into the infrastructure itself. Cities, supply chains, energy systems, ecosystems, all becoming self-regulating through a web of sensors, agents, and algorithms. In this world, the line between government, environment, and technology begins to blur. And yet, as we decentralize and automate governance, a new set of questions emerges. Who designs the protocols? Who trains the models? Who gets to opt in or out? What values are encoded in these systems? Technology doesn't remove politics, it shifts its terrain. If we don't bring consciousness and ethics into these designs, we risk embedding bias, inequality, and extraction into the very core of our future. That's why new governance systems must not only be decentralized and intelligent, but also regenerative and just. They must be designed for transparency, adaptability, and collective empowerment. They must be open to audit, revision, and evolution. This is already happening. In Barcelona, participatory budgeting platforms allow citizens to propose and vote on how municipal funding are allocated, bridging direct democracy into the age of the internet. And in communities around the world, local food systems, mutual aid networks, and cooperative platforms are reclaiming governance from the top down and rebuilding it from the ground up. These experiments are still fragile. Many will fail, but some will mature. And when they do, they'll offer blueprints for how humanity can coordinate in the 21st century. Not through domination or decree, but through emergence, alignment, and shared sense-making. The deeper shift here is from governance as control to governance as coordination, from power over to power with, from rigid hierarchies to living networks. And just as the caterpillar must dissolve before the butterfly can form, the legacy institutions of today may need to loosen their grip for these new models to fully take flight. The future of governance won't be one system to rule them all. It will be a constellation of interoperable protocols, each suited to different contexts, scales, and values. Some may resemble ancient forms, like councils, tribes, and guilds. Others will be entirely novel, born from the logics of cryptography, AI, and ecological design. But across this diversity, a shared principle will emerge. Systems that are transparent, adaptive, participatory, and aligned with the long arc of life on Earth will outcompete those that are opaque, brittle, coercive, or extractive. This is the evolutionary logic of governance in the 21st century. It's not about upgrading the state. It's about upgrading coordination. And if we do it right, governance can become not a burden, but a shared art, a living expression of collective intelligence. a bridge between complexity and coherence, a technology of belonging. And the imaginal cells of new governance structures are already here. They're prototyping the architectures of the new civilization, not with flags or ideologies, but with code, communities, and new forms of trust. When we step back and look at these three domains, money, energy, and governance, it becomes clear that we're not just upgrading our systems. We're rewriting the fundamental protocols that shape civilization itself. Each of these shifts, Bitcoin as a new foundation for value and trust, clean decentralized energy as a fuel of a post-scarcity economy, and emergent governance models that replace control with coordination, are transformative on their own. But their true significance emerges in their convergence again. Together, they signal the emergence of an entirely new architecture for how humanity organizes itself. An architecture that is decentralized, resilient, and aligned with both planetary boundaries and human dignity. One that no longer depends on scarcity, secrecy, and centralized control, but builds from principles of transparency, abundance, and collective intelligence. We're witnessing the slow but steady emergence of a new societal stack. Not imposed from above, but growing from the edges. Imaginal cells forming the scaffolding for what comes next. Now, in the next episode, we'll explore the final and perhaps most essential domain of transformation, the evolution of consciousness itself. Because no shift in systems will hold if we don't also shift the story we tell about who we are, why we're here, and how we belong to the whole. Until then, thank you very much for listening again. If this episode stirred something within you, please send it to your friends, share it within your community. And as you know, you can get the initiation wherever you get your podcast so that you don't miss an episode. Until then, stay grounded and connected what truly matters. Thank you.